What can beer teach you about the climate around you? Grab a cold one, then give us a few minutes of your time.
There's a really strong relationship between a healthy soil and a healthy water cycle, and it really comes down to carbon in the soil. There's plenty of research that's been done. A particular researcher, Glenn Morris in Australia, has proven that carbon in the soil, a rich humus-like soil, can hold anywhere between 4 and 25 times its weight in water.
Soil may seem a long way from beer, but we're getting there. Humus is the Latin word for earth or ground. Humus is a dark organic matter in soil formed from the natural decomposition of organic matter like dead leaves, roots, and animal waste. The difference between it and compost is it's natural. Compost is man-made. Humus soils are rich in carbon, water, and nutrients essential for plant growth.
So if we have a healthy soil that's rich in carbon, we have a huge part of the landscape, a layer in the landscape that can store and hold water for us. And that's really important because water has a whole bunch of really cool properties, no pun intended, but it can help to buffer climatic extremes. It can absorb huge amounts of heat energy, and that means that we don't have to feel it here on the surface. It also is able to, from the soil, cycle that water through plants into the atmosphere, which creates a cooling effect around us. And also, as water transpires into the atmosphere, it participates in our small water cycle, which there's a lot of research now proving that the small water cycle, which is how plants transpire water into the air, which condenses as rain, falls back onto the land. It's the provider of the most regular and gentle rainfall that we get inland, rather than those big offshore weather systems that we have to wait to arrive, and then usually they dump down in a massive storm.
You've seen those big systems on your local weather forecasts. For the United States, they typically come off the Pacific Ocean and meander east across the country.
When we have water stored in our soil and in our plants, and that's being cycled around, that provides us more regular, small rainfall, which we can rely on for water security.
Healy's work at the Mulloon Institute centers on landscape rehydration, creating natural methods for keeping stormwater from rapidly draining away from an area, slowing the water so it has more time to soak into the landscape and down to groundwater reserves below. That work has inspired similar projects at Wildcat Bluff Nature Center and on ranches on the outskirts of Amarillo. Those projects are what brought Healy to the Texas Panhandle. Essentially, landscape rehydration can change the climate of an area. It's called a microclimate.
So a microclimate is an area of the ecosystem that, when it's functioning well, creates its own small climate, being its regular rainfall, its temperature, rainfall patterns. And so when you have an area that is highly vegetated, it's got moist soils, it's got intact water features such as wetlands or breaks that move water slowly.
Consider microclimates as a local set of atmospheric conditions that differ from those in the surrounding areas. Sometimes the difference is slight, sometimes it's substantial.
It basically creates an area where that water can cycle around and create a really nice habitat for biodiversity, but it also can help the production of grasslands. What comes to mind when we talk about this is that when we talk to landholders, if they are working on increasing and improving the way that water is moved and stored and cycled in their local part of the landscape, they create their own microclimate. But not only that, if they're surrounded by a swath of land that is dehydrating and degrading, and their patch of land is actually building and improving because of better management practices and landscape rehydration work, they might actually be almost like an oasis, which attracts water back to their patch of property, compared to areas that are hotter and drier because there's not the infrastructure in place to hold and store water. Those areas are going to exude a lot of heat, which pushes away any potential water or rainfall that's attracted to that area.
And that's where we finally get to beer.
When you have a cool area, similar to when you have a cold can of beer, and even before opening the top, you have water droplets starting to form on the outside of that can of beer. It's attracting water to it. When you have a cool, hydrated landscape, it attracts water to it in the same way. And so there's some early research showing that even on a small scale, having an active and a healthy water cycle and landscape rehydration is the way to achieve that. You can start to get more of your regular rainfall and create that pattern for yourself on your own property.
Now, back to that healthy, water-retaining humus soil.
When you have a hydrated soil, your plants have a greater ability to grow. Naturally, for a plant to grow, it's like an energy intensive process. Think like a car engine. And water is needed to cool the plant for it to grow. So when you run out of water in a landscape, basically that plant doesn't have the opportunity to cool itself as it's growing, and so it will simply dry out and oxidize. And so water plays a really crucial role in green leaf production, having crops that are growing. When you have a hydrated soil, it's also really important for the soil health in terms of the microbiology, and the microbiology in the growing plants, that's that relationship with putting carbon into the soil and cycling nutrients.
Healy sees similarities between the Texas Panhandle landscape and cattle grazing areas in Australia.
So there's many experts, across the United States and Australia that focus on sustainable grazing management. We really think it's important for any landscape that the grasses are grazed in a way that supports that plant's growth. So in Australia, when we were colonised by the United Kingdom from England, the kind of landscape that they had there was very different. The type of plant growth was very different. In Australia, our plants are a lot more fragile. It's a drier continent. And so the period at which plants are grazed is really important. And what we saw with the introduction of a lot of grazing pressure was that these plants were grazed really heavily, to the point where they didn't have the rest period they needed to regrow. And after a plant is grazed extensively again and again, it starts to even lose the ability to regrow at all. And so over time, when you have large amounts of stock, whether it's sheep or cattle on the landscape, they can create this pressure on the grasses to the point where those grasses disappear completely. And with those grasses disappearing, there's a breakdown in the cycle of nutrients, definitely in the cycle of water throughout the landscape, and obviously the cycle of carbon. And it's these cycles that really underpin whether a landscape is healthy or functioning. And so with overgrazing, we basically take away the landscape's ability to cycle its nutrients and its water.
You've looked from afar at Frying Pan Ranch. Tell me about that evaluation, what you were doing and what you've just seen preliminarily.
Yeah, so the Mulloon Institute has a consulting branch, and we had Tim Ingalls from Frying Pan Ranch approach Mulloon, and we were engaged to conduct a remote site inspection of his property to really understand how water was moving through his area of land and where there were opportunities to maybe start to enhance areas that were functioning well or repair degraded areas. And so our approach was really to look at the local climate, to look at the soils and the geology that underpins the property, and the different vegetation types, the playa lakes versus the breaks that they have. And our approach was to look at particularly the alluvial features in the landscape, which alluvial as a term means deposited by water. So in those parts of the landscape, we can really see where water was once flowing and where it has been building up sediment over time. And in these areas, they're best placed to actually hold and store water. And in some areas on Frying Pan Ranch, they were the areas that have been degraded by overgrazing, where the pressure from livestock has disrupted the vegetation, which in turn can no longer hold the soil in place, which then means that when it rains, you have soil wash, you start to have washes form, erosion gullies form, and they basically rip out the invisible plug that's holding the water in the landscape. And so the approach that we took was to highlight these areas where the function of the landscape had been broken by potentially just land use or bad management practices. And what I should say here is that generally speaking, ranchers, landholders, farmers, they're doing the best with the knowledge that they have at the time. But now we have so much more information and understanding and research that can point us towards a better way of managing the landscape. And so our report was a high-level look at the different landscape types where there was the opportunity to reinstate landscape function and restore the way that water was being moved slowly and held and cycled, and find areas where we could use natural infrastructure in some way, shape or form to reinstate that function.
If Frying Pan engages further, what would be next steps?
So our first step would be to establish some demonstration sites.
So similar to what they're attempting to do here at Wildcat Bluff as well.
Yes, exactly. And it's really exciting to see across the world, there's a whole bunch of organizations that are now starting to form that are either taking First Nations or Indigenous knowledge to water management, or some of the upcoming science, which is often very similar, to do natural infrastructure work in their own ways. Ways that a human, an individual, can do small-scale, low-risk work across an area to really have a huge impact on the way that water moves through the landscape.
If you want to learn more about landscape rehydration projects in the Texas Panhandle, check out previous episodes of Sustain the Plains on our Panhandle PBS YouTube channel. Tell us what you'd like to learn in the comments below. And subscribe, because we've got more great content in store about living and lasting on the High Plains.
At Panhandle PBS, our reliable news reporting and fact-based storytelling has always been free. We're proud to offer our work for free thanks to generous support of viewers like you. If you appreciate our journalism and would like to see it continue, please consider making a donation to Panhandle PBS today.